Hello and welcome. My name is Atim Tongana and you're watching A News. Here are your headlines. The US says it stopped a surprise Iran missile attack on its bases in the Middle East and joined forces with the Saudis in retaliatory strikes. 13 people are confirmed dead as the search for survivors continues after Japan's latest earthquake. And Turkey's president announces a major oil deal with Iraq as its prime minister visits Ankara. The US says it has intercepted an Iranian missile attack on its bases in the Middle East and launched retaliatory strikes backed by Saudi Arabia. Washington says it set its sights and used by Iran-backed militia groups have targeted the area. Here's more.
The United States says Iran launched multiple ballistic missiles at American forces in the Middle East in what it described as an attempted surprise attack. According to US Central Command, all of the missiles were successfully intercepted and no target locations were disclosed. In response, US and Saudi Arabian forces carried out strikes on what Central Command called Iran-aligned terrorist logistics and weapons sites in eastern Iraq. Washington says the operation was a direct response to more than 30 drone attacks over the past 72 hours, which it says were directed by Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. Central Command warned that Iran and its allied groups must stop the attacks or face further military action. Iran has not yet commented on the latest developments. Earlier in the day, Saudi Arabia said it had intercepted drones targeting petroleum facilities in the country's eastern region. The renewed exchange of strikes comes just one day after US President Donald Trump spoke of what he described as very friendly negotiations with Iran. The latest military action ends a 3-day pause in fighting that had raised hopes for diplomacy. That pause followed nearly 2 weeks of US airstrikes in southern Iran, which Washington says targeted tunnels and bridges. Despite talk of possible negotiations, major differences remain, particularly over the Strait of Hormuz, while Tehran continues to deny that any formal talks are taking place.
Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps has confirmed that it has carried out a missile attack on a US command base in Jordan. The group also says it has halted 3 oil tankers that it claims were sailing illegally in the Strait of Hormuz. Taraj for A News reports.
Iran's Revolutionary Guards, IRGC, confirmed that its aerospace force targeted a U.S. military base in Jordan with scores of ballistic missiles early on Wednesday. According to Sepah News, the IRGC stressed, and I quote, the threats by the U.S. officials and their illegal interventions against Iran's interests shall stop. The missile strike came after 2 days of a lull when tit-for-tat attacks between Iran and the U.S. had stopped. However, Wednesday's strike coincided with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's visit to Washington, the first in 5 months. It's amid reports that U.S. President Donald Trump is dissatisfied with Israeli intelligence. In another development, the Revolutionary Guard said its Navy units hit and stopped 3 tankers at Iran's southern waters, which it said intended to transit through what it called unsafe and illegal routes. The force warned in a statement, and I quote, illegal interventions and embargoes of the U.S. military against vessels in the region will not go unanswered. It referred to the U.S. blockade of Iran's ports and its escorting of vessels at the Strait of Hormuz. Meantime, the spokesman for the Khatam al-Anbiya central headquarters warned that any company or country that receives money from frozen Iranian assets will not be allowed to pass through the strategic waterway. According to the Defa Press website, which covers Iran's military and defense news, Ebrahim Zolfaqari slammed U.S. President Donald Trump's threat of compensation for vessels damaged in the war from Iran's blocked assets. Previously, on Monday, the Joint Operational Command of Iran's armed forces had warned that any U.S. effort to impose a naval blockade on Iran would be regarded as an escalation of the conflict, promising that the Iranian armed forces would respond to any hostile action. Turaj Shiralilu from Tehran for A News.
Tehran says ships belonging to any country or entity accepting compensation from frozen Iranian assets will be barred from using the Strait of Hormuz. The statement followed U.S. President Donald Trump's proposal to compensate damaged vessels using frozen Iranian funds held overseas. Iran's military has rejected Trump's plan, blaming the U.S. for creating insecurity in the region. It says foreign registered vessels are continuing to use what it called illegal and unsafe route in Hormuz. Tehran has restricted the U.S. and Israeli-linked vessels since late February, following joint strikes on Iranian territory. Sources say Iran is expected to receive up to 400 Chinese-made air defense missile systems in the coming weeks as Tehran moves to rebuild its military capabilities following months of conflict with the U.S. and Israel. The $70 million deal involves shoulder-fired missiles designed to protect strategic sites from drones and was reportedly brokered by a Hong Kong-based company, while sources claim the weapons will transit through Pakistan and Beijing and Islamabad and have officially dismissed the reports as groundless. President Trump has held what he called productive meetings with the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in Washington. Their talks come as Washington weighs in on its next step on Iran and Israel pushes for continued U.S. involvement.
U.S. President Donald Trump and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu held a nearly 90-minute closed-door meeting at the White House, with Iran dominating their talks. Netanyahu was expected to present intelligence suggesting Tehran was expanding activity at Pickaxe Mountain, a fortified underground facility near one of Iran's main nuclear sites. Hours before the meeting, Trump publicly criticized Netanyahu after details of the planned briefing appeared in the media. The U.S. president said the Israeli leader wanted Washington to remain involved in the conflict. Trump has paused U.S. airstrikes against Iran to give diplomacy another chance, while Israel remains concerned that Tehran could rebuild its nuclear capabilities.
I just finished an excellent meeting with President Trump. When I say excellent, it's not just lip service. A conversation with full partnership, mutual support, understanding of the common goal to ensure that Iran does not have nuclear weapons and other goals as well. This is one of the best conversations I have had with the President of the United States, our friend President Donald Trump. His entire senior team was there, and ours too. Here too there was an opportunity to exchange ideas and to coordinate important coordination for the security and future of the State of Israel.
Netanyahu's remarks presented a united front, despite months of differences over the Iran conflict and Israeli military action against Hezbollah in Lebanon. The leaders were also expected to discuss expanding the Abraham Accords, including possible Saudi participation. Riyadh has so far ruled out normalizing relations without a path towards Palestinian statehood. Sources said Netanyahu also sought Trump's support ahead of Israel's election on October 27th. The White House described the meeting as positive and productive, but no new agreement was immediately announced.
Following the meeting between Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu, the main focus appears to be Iran and, of course, the next phase of the conflict. Both leaders described the meeting as positive. Reports also do suggest that there were tensions between the two leaders before the meeting, particularly over how to deal with Iran. Joining us now for more on this particular story is Ilan Siliom, a geopolitical analyst based in Paris. Thank you so much for joining us on A News.
Thank you.
Straight off the bat, what do you think the two leaders actually agreed on behind closed doors? And do you think that Netanyahu got what he wanted out of this meeting?
I think there is something to say. What's striking isn't what leaked, it's what didn't. And to be clear, this is one of Netanyahu's shortest visits in Washington, closed to the press, no joint statement. So this format choice tells you something. Officially, both call it productive. Netanyahu called it the best conversation he had with Trump, framed as a full partnership on denying Iran a nuclear weapon. But the substance is selective. The two hardest irritants, the sale of F-35 to Turkey, which Israel opposed, and the path of Israeli withdrawal from Lebanon, they were reportedly not raised. That's the real story. So not agreement, but mutual avoidance, let's say. So what Netanyahu got instead was atmosphere, plus than a shared line on Israel nuclear program, and as well a discussion on a possible Saudi normalization tied to the US-Saudi nuclear deal that has been raised last week. So real, but not the qualitative military edge guarantee on Turkey he came in seeking, and no new long-term defense pact was announced. So Netanyahu got warmth, but he needed a photo of alignment more than a policy of alignment, and that's exactly what he got 3 months before the Israeli election.
So we know that they've had differences with regards to the Middle East policy. Do you think that Netanyahu left Washington with the level of the US support that he was seeking for Israel's approach to Iran?
Well, not really, and that's the more important story than the handshake. Remember, last February, the US and Israel were united around destroying Iran nuclear and missile program, with Netanyahu also focused on regime collapse. So that alignment has eroded. Since the ceasefire, Netanyahu, who wanted to keep fight against Iran and Hezbollah, he has been sidelined as Trump pursued a negotiated track. An Israeli source assessed Trump has little interest in resuming full conflict, at least before November US election, the midterm. So you could hear, remember, hours before Netanyahu arrived in Washington, he said on Fox and Friends, he publicly slapped down Netanyahu on signing, dismissing his concern about the Peak X mountain nuclear site, saying that it's not a big problem. He said as well that he doesn't need Bibi to tell him that he said that Netanyahu came to keep Trump involved. This is what the president say. So that's a U.S. president reminding his ally who sets the tempo right before receiving him. So this disagreement isn't just about Iran policy, it's about who drives it. Netanyahu came wanting more than reassurance. He raised a possible round 2 strike, arguing that Iran is rebuilding. So on support, yes, Netanyahu left calling it as a triumph, but on strategy, military pressure versus diplomatic track, he got Trump's existing position, not a shift toward his own.
Okay, so how much influence does Netanyahu then still have over Trump's approach to the conflict, particularly given reports that the US president has become increasingly frustrated with Israel's strategy, and given what you've just said as well?
Well, regarding the influence of Netanyahu on Trump, I think this is less that at any point since Trump came back to the office. And both sides knows it, even if neither say it on camera. I think that the clearest signal came from inside Netanyahu's own media ecosystem. Amit Segal, a journalist, Israeli journalist, wrote in Israel Hayom that the Americans are making clear they run the war, and that Israel has been put in a subordinate position. So the frustration runs both ways. Netanyahu allies slam the April ceasefire, and pro-Netanyahu outlets attacked its architects by name. They attacked Vance, they attacked Kushner, they attacked Witkoff, and prompting Vance to accuse the cabinet of Netanyahu of sabotage. So that's not the language of a patron who feels obligated to differ. Structurally now, Netanyahu is sidelined on the two hardest files. The Trump moving on F-35 to Turkey despite Israeli lobbying, and on the Saudi nuclear deal, where Netanyahu still has leverage is narrower and personal. Shared political timing and residual credibility from having convinced Trump to go to war in the first place.
Now, how does this meeting affect the wider region, especially Iraq, the Gulf states, and other countries that could be drawn further into conflict?
Well, let's be clear on this question. The Gulf is already in this conflict, not as a participant, but as a target. The question isn't whether they get drawn in, it's whether they get drawn in deeper. Since late February, it's been a regional war in its effect. Iran has struck 5 Gulf states and declared the Strait of Hormuz closed. Iranian affiliated media have named specific targets: power plants in Abu Dhabi, in Dubai, in Qatar, in Riyadh. So the economic shock is structural. Producers cut output at one point by around 10 million barrels per day. It's huge. It's 10% of global supply. And at the same time, the UAE is now building infrastructure to permanently reduce their dependence on the Strait of Hormuz. So, crucially, the Gulf is not aligned with Netanyahu's escalatory instinct. The UAE is forceful, but Saudi Arabia has called for de-escalation and pushed Pakistan-based talk. Across the board, the Gulf chose restraint over confrontation. So a meeting producing no green light for round 2 is, from Riyadh and Abu Dhabi view, it's the better outcome. So their interests converge right now with the Trump diplomatic track, not with Netanyahu military one. Iraq is maybe the more exposed variable between US bases, Iran-aligned armed group, and transit routes, which is exactly why de-escalation matters to Baghdad most.
Thank you so much for your time. We really do appreciate your insights here on A News.
Thank you very much.
Meanwhile, an Israeli airstrike has hit a mosque in Gaza City. The attack destroyed a mosque close to a YMCA building. The explosion sent large plumes of smoke into the sky. It's reported that one person died when the Nusayrat refugee camp was hit, injuring at least a dozen people. The aftermath left hundreds of people displaced without shelter after their temporary encampment was destroyed. After the break, Ukraine's President Zelensky holds talks with Trump in Washington as the U.S. edges towards a new sanctions package on Moscow. President Trump has held talks with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky in Washington. It comes as Kiev seeks to renew diplomatic ties and military support from the U.S. as its conflict with Russia continues. A News correspondent James Gordison has more.
Well, I think it's fair to say that President Volodymyr Zelensky and President Donald Trump's relationships fluctuated a lot since their tempestuous meeting in the Oval Office at the start of the president's second term. That meeting, of course, led to a blazing row in front of the world's media. Mr. Zelensky is in Washington to attend the funeral of one of his fiercest backers on Capitol Hill, the late Republican Senator Lindsey Graham. Now, the meeting with President Trump was a closed-door affair, no questions, and he arrived through the side entrance to the White House, but all smiles in the photos Mr. Zelensky posted on social media afterwards, saying that they'd had a good meeting. He said that they spoke about Patriot interceptor licenses. That's a key request from the Ukrainian president, who's seen Russian ballistic missiles rain down across his country since the war began. He also spoke about reinvigorating peace talks. What's interesting about this is that Donald Trump dropped a real peace push earlier this year as the Iran conflict took a prominent role. However, Iran talks are of course stalling, so could Mr. Trump pivot back to trying to secure a ceasefire in Ukraine in order to get that elusive diplomatic win, which he likely wants prior to the midterms in November. Mr. Zelensky, for his part, is also facing backlash at home for sacking his defense minister and army chief, so it would boost his popularity if it appeared he was getting on well with the president. Certainly the relationship between the two men seems closer than ever, and really I think reflects a shift on the right of American politics back towards Ukraine's support. Nothing directly promised, no eye-catching deal agreed here, but certainly we are miles away from the acrimonious meeting last year in front of the nation's media. James Goodison for A News in Washington, D.C.
Plans for a new U.S. sanctions package against Russia has come a step closer to being passed after receiving backing in Senate. Lawmakers have overwhelmingly backed the measures, clearing the way for a final vote. The tally was 86-12 in favor. The proposals target Russian officials, bank, financial institutions, and the so-called shadow fleet used to transport Russian oil. It would also give President Donald Trump the authority to impose tariffs of up to 100% on countries that continue buying Russian energy. After meeting with senators at Capitol Hill, Zelensky praised the bill, saying stronger sanctions are key to increasing pressure on Russia.
And we are very thankful for this discussion. The discussion was with details how to help Ukraine, and we are thankful that this bill is very important. Sanctions pressure on Russia is very important, and really it gives, it's not only about money, how to stop to finance this war, but it's also a big signal to Europe, big signal to Ukraine, big support of our people. So I'm very thankful. I hope that, God bless, we will have positive results.
Russia's Federal Security Service has charged Telegram founder with aiding terrorist activities. The agency said it has also begun procedures to place Pavel Durov on an international wanted list. The FSB alleges Telegram failed to remove channels and bots used to coordinate attacks and sabotage and cybercrime inside Russia. It claimed the platform was used by Ukrainian intelligence services and groups Russia designates as terrorists or extremist. There was no immediate comment from Durov or Telegram. Ukraine president says Kyiv struck several Russian targets on Wednesday, including a logistics center in Ryaz, an oil refinery in the Perm region, and facilities in Rostov and occupied Crimea. In response, Russia's defense military said its forces struck 2 vessels carrying weapons and military equipment to Ukrainian ports near Odessa. Meanwhile, Russian officials reported Ukrainian drone strikes in the Belgorod region that killed 3 people and injured 19 others. Further strikes were reported in other Russian regions, with online retailer Wild Berries saying it evacuated one logistic hub following safety advice. Meanwhile, Wild Berries could be in line for a state aid package after several of its warehouses were targeted in Ukrainian strikes. The Kremlin has acknowledged that discussions have taken place, but no decision had been made.
The Russian government is considering support measures for the country's largest online retailer, Wild Berries, and thousands of businesses that rely on its platform. The move comes after Ukrainian drone strikes damaged 7 of its warehouses, wiping out around 10% of the company's storage capacity and leaving many sellers facing significant financial losses. A Wildberries seller said an entire shipment of pet food, worth around nearly $20,000, had been destroyed in the fire.
I opened my seller account and realized that everything there had been destroyed. I just sat down and burst into tears. What else can you do in a situation like this? Given the number of responsibilities I have, I don't know what to do next.
Large businesses were also affected. Clothing retailer Fin Flair estimated that around 35,000 items worth more than $1.2 million were destroyed in the damaged warehouses.
We plan to negotiate with Wildberries. Wildberries is one of our key partners. At the moment, we have information that Wildberries will be making compensation payments. They plan to start with smaller sellers because they were affected the most, and later they will compensate larger sellers as well.
Wildberries said it would need at least 30 days to assess the damage before compensation payments begin. The company has also announced reduced storage fees to support affected sellers. The Kremlin praised Wildberries for offering assistance to affected sellers despite having no legal obligation to compensate businesses. Officials are discussing possible support measures, including state-backed loans, tax breaks and subsidies, with state-controlled lender VTB expected to play a key role. No final decision has been announced. Ukraine said it targeted Wildberries because of its alleged role in supplying the Russian military and its financial ties with the VTB bank.
Russia's President Putin made a phone call to the president of Azerbaijan, Aliyev, on Tuesday. The talks mark the latest high-level engagement between the two countries since the 15th of April settlement over the crash of a passenger aircraft under which Russia addressed Azerbaijan's principal demands. It also comes against the backdrop of Baku's continued criticism of remarks made by the spokeswoman for the Russian Foreign Ministry concerning the former Armenian-Azerbaijan conflict. Joining me on the story is Vasif Yusenov, the head of the Department of the Center for Analysis of International Relations. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me.
Let's begin with that phone call between the two leaders. What does this phone call signal about Russia's priorities in relation to Azerbaijan?
Over the past 2 weeks, we have actually seen many signs of normalization and reconciliation between Russia and Azerbaijan. It started at Sham Global Media Forum when President Aliyev announced that relations between the two countries have normalized. And 4 days after his announcement, Foreign Minister Ceyhun Bayramov of Azerbaijan traveled to Moscow. And during his press conference with Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, the two ministers reiterated the messages of normalization. And therefore, the latest phone call between President Ilham Aliyev and President Vladimir Putin was not surprising. It came upon the heels of what happened over the past several days, 2 weeks between the two countries. It shows that the two countries, both governments, are really willing to normalize the relations, to overcome the difficulties that have been recorded between Russia and Azerbaijan over the past 1 year and a half since the airplane crash in December 2024. And obviously, both countries need each other for different reasons, but particularly for Russia, Azerbaijan's importance has increased a lot due to a number of reasons, particularly the fact that Russia needs Azerbaijan for north-south transportation corridor.
All right, just to appraise our viewers, this discussion is particularly about the phone call between the president of Russia, Mr. Putin, and the president of Azerbaijan, Mr. Aliyev. The talks mark the latest high-level engagement between the two countries since the 15th of April settlement over the crash of a passenger aircraft under which Russia addressed Azerbaijan's principal demands. Now, I want to find out from you, Azerbaijan has increasingly pursued a more independent foreign policy approach and strengthened ties with other regions or regional partners. How does Moscow view Baku's growing strategic autonomy?
From Moscow's perspective, of course, it would have been ideal situation if Azerbaijan was entirely dependent on Russia, following its priorities when it comes to regional politics. But nowadays, Russia is passing through very difficult geopolitical circumstances, and many of Russia's neighbors are actually trying to distance themselves from Russia, and some of them have actually taken anti-Russian, unfriendly moves. Against this background, Azerbaijan's very principled, balanced foreign policy can be actually and is indeed appreciated by Russian side, because Azerbaijani government has demonstrated strategic autonomy, as you said, independence in foreign policy, very principled position, following the balanced approach in foreign policy that has been implemented by the Azerbaijani government since the 1990s. And this is the very basic factor related with this approach, is that Azerbaijan is interested in mutually respectful, mutually beneficial relations with all major great powers without taking any adversarial steps against any other major power. And currently, we are passing through very confrontational geopolitical environment in the region. And in this environment, under these circumstances, the fact that Azerbaijan can actually pursue independent foreign policy, and when it comes to Russia-Azerbaijan relations, can stay again independent following mutually beneficial relations. It's a fact that appreciated by the Russian government as well. That's why it is not surprising that President Vladimir Putin initiated the telephone call with President Aliyev, expressed his interest, willingness in deepening relations between the two countries.
Mr. Vasif, we really do appreciate your insights right here on A News.
Thank you.
13 people are confirmed dead after a powerful earthquake struck southern Japan. Rescue efforts are continuing in Kumamoto Prefecture as experts warn of further seismic tremors.
Rescue teams continue to search for people trapped beneath the rubble on Wednesday after a 7.1 magnitude earthquake struck Kumamoto Prefecture in southern Japan. It knocked out power to thousands of homes and ruptured roads across the region. 8 people were pulled alive from the rubble of a partially collapsed shopping mall. However, the death toll has risen.
As of 8:30 a.m. local time today, we have confirmed 13 people dead and extensive damage, including human injuries, collapsed buildings, fires, and damage to roads and other infrastructure. I offer my deepest condolences to those who have lost their lives and to their bereaved families. I also extend my sincere sympathies to everyone who has been affected by this disaster.
The earthquake struck about 20 kilometers south of Kumamoto City, which has a population of around 700,000. Part of the stone wall of Kumamoto Castle collapsed. Tourists who were inside fled to safety. Customers inside a Muji store in Kumamoto Prefecture took cover on the floor. Officials advised around 260,000 residents to go to evacuation centers. The Japan Meteorological Agency has warned that further strong earthquakes are possible in the coming week. There is also a continuing risk of landslides. Kumamoto Prefecture was hit by another major earthquake 10 years ago. That disaster killed 275 people, injured nearly 2,739 others, and damaged thousands of buildings, including the walls of Kumamoto Castle.
Wildfires continue to threaten parts of central Spain, with flames reaching residential areas and forcing thousands from their homes. Although conditions have improved overnight, officials warn the danger is far from over as another heat wave approaches.
Residents of the central Spanish town of El Tiemblo watched as firefighters and volunteers battled flames that spread from a major wildfire into residential areas. Some homes suffered damage, while emergency crews worked to stop the fire from advancing further. Local volunteers also helped rescue animals, put out smaller fires, and distribute water to affected communities.
They say a flame landed there and the house caught fire. My mother lives here. She's not here right now. I came running to see what I could do. They saved the house. It's unbelievable. The town is... You cannot be here.
We are battling fires, providing water, helping neighbours, rescuing animals, giving them water to drink. We are doing whatever is needed.
Spanish authorities have begun easing restrictions, allowing residents evacuated from 13 towns to return home. Wildfires have already burned tens of thousands of hectares across the provinces of Avila and Madrid. Firefighters remain on the front lines in Madrid and the neighbouring provinces of Avila and Toledo. The Spanish government says cooler overnight conditions helped crews contain several active fire fronts, reducing the immediate threat. However, the fires are still not under control. Spain is now preparing for its fourth heat wave of the summer, with forecasters warning that high temperatures, strong southerly winds and low humidity could push wildfire risk to extreme levels.
More than 4,000 new evacuations were ordered in France's Gironde region on Tuesday as new pockets of fire restarted in the embattled area. There are further fears of the situation worsening as a fresh heat wave is due to hit the area around Bordeaux on Wednesday, with temperatures in excess of 40 degrees Celsius. A News' Ross reports in Bordeaux.
Well, I'm here at an evacuation centre in Bordeaux, where hundreds of people continue to be cared for around the clock after having been forced to leave their homes. There was some good news for some of the people here on Tuesday. They were allowed to return home after their houses were declared to be in a fire-safe zone. But there were also thousands more evacuations in an area far to the west of Bordeaux, so it shows that the situation remains very challenging. But the biggest issue potentially on Wednesday is going to be the high temperatures here, around 42 to 43 degrees Celsius, another heat wave pummeling the region. The ground is very dry. We've had the extremes of weather this year, a very wet winter spurring lots of growth of grasses, which have then been turned tinder dry by successive heat waves. This is the fourth such heat wave we've had so far this summer. So the challenge for the fire brigade is going to be to ensure that these high temperatures don't cause new fires to start or previously controlled blazes to reignite. Ross Cullen, A News, Bordeaux.
Student protesters in India are warning they'll return to the streets if police complaints against those taking part in demonstrations are not dropped. The country's top court has ordered no action should be taken against protesters in the cockroach movement who are aged under 18. There's a report by A News in the area.
The founder of the Cockroach Janata Party, Abhijit Debke, has accused the Indian government of carrying out a, quote, witch hunt against students who came out to demand the education minister's resignation. This is coming as the Cockroach Janata Party has claimed that in the last few days, 100 people have been arrested or detained after the protests wrapped up over the weekend. Local media is reporting that police teams are also reportedly asking social media platforms to hand over details of accounts that may have targeted Prime Minister Narendra Modi in their posts. The month-long protest led by the Cockroach Janata Party or the CJP wrapped up this weekend after the Modi government gave in to mounting public pressure over exam paper leaks and the education minister resigned. Protesters say the government had promised not to target any demonstrator and that this promise has been violated by police teams in several Indian states ruled by Prime Minister Modi's party. The Cockroach Janata Party says if the government does not honour the agreement and release everyone detained or arrested or be questioned, they will be forced to resume that protest. On Tuesday, India's Supreme Court also directed the government to release anyone under the age of 18 in detention, but that order doesn't extend to anyone with a criminal record. The Cockroach Janata Party says this contradicts the government's assurance, and they are demanding all police cases against every protester be immediately withdrawn, and that if this, quote, harassment of students doesn't stop, another large protest could be launched very soon. The government is yet to comment on these allegations. Now, the controversy is coming even as authorities are fighting allegations of using excessive force against students who attempted to march to parliament last week. A police crackdown saw officials fire tear gas, shells, and use sticks on students. The police maintains they were not aggressors, but the Supreme Court has now suggested that these claims need to be investigated independently. The protest, which saw tens of thousands of students take to the streets here in Delhi, became the largest show of dissent against Mr. Modi's party, forcing a rare climb down from his government, something we've not seen in 12 years. Experts say the government was likely worried about the protest spreading and also eroding Mr. Modi's political capital ahead of crucial regional elections. His government is now planning to bring in a new legislation with a proposed 10-year jail term to tackle exam paper leaks. But the opposition says that simply bringing in a new law will not be enough. It's the implementation of existing rules that's an issue. Neha Punia, Foreign News in New Delhi.
Sudan's military says it has made further gains in North Kordofan, but the battlefield advances are being overshadowed by a deepening humanitarian crisis. Aid agencies warn that civilians, especially children, are paying the highest price as the conflict enters its fourth year. A news correspondent Naba reports.
The conflict in Sudan continues, with the army announcing new territorial gains in North Kordofan. The army chief, General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, has recently visited newly recaptured towns after the army says it had pushed the RSF fighters. The army says the operations aimed at expanding its control, but fighting remains active in parts across the state. As the conflict continues, the humanitarian agencies warn that civilians are bearing the brunt. The UNICEF says at least 23 children have been killed in North Kordofan since May, as the violence around Al Ubaid continues. The war in Sudan has now entered its fourth year, displacing more than 13 million people and leaving millions more in need of humanitarian assistance. So despite the army gains, the humanitarian situation is likely to worsen even further. Naba Muhiddin, for News, Khartoum, Sudan.
After the break, Turkey's president announces a major oil deal with Iraq as its prime minister visits Ankara. Turkey's President Erdogan says the country's state-owned oil production company has become a partner in Iraq's Kirkuk field. Speaking alongside Iraqi Prime Minister Ali al-Zaidi in Ankara, he described the newly signed energy agreement with Turkish Petroleum as a historic step. The Turkish president said the two countries were working on a new energy cooperation agreement and said that Iraq could supply Turkey with up to 1 million barrels of oil per day. He added that Turkey sees Iraq's peace and stability as closely linked to its own security and aims to expand cooperation in energy, transport and security.
British Petrol'ün operatörlüğünü yürüttüğü
The Kirkuk production field has been granted to Turkish Petroleum as a partner. The agreement signed today is a historic step in terms of partnership in the energy sector. We are striving to ensure that our region is known not for war, terrorism and conflict, but for development, prosperity, peace and stability. Turkey has never viewed Iraq's peace and stability separately from its own security, because Iraq is one of the countries that has suffered from war and instability. The Development Road project, which aims to connect the Gulf region to global markets through Iraq, has become even more important under the current regional circumstances. Ankara remains in close dialogue with Iraq to advance its terror-free Turkey process and its vision of a terror-free region.
Daimi bir işbirliği alanı olarak görüyoruz.
The announcement comes as Iraq's Prime Minister makes his first official visit to Turkey since taking office. Adam Mero has more from Istanbul.
President Recep Tayyip Erdogan welcomed Iraqi Prime Minister Mohammed Ali al-Zaidi to the presidential complex in Ankara on Tuesday evening, before the two leaders held closed-door discussions and addressed a joint press conference. Speaking to reporters, Erdogan said Turkey-Iraq relations had entered what he described as a more strategic phase, stressing Ankara's readiness to support Baghdad and step up bilateral ties. The two leaders said they had discussed a range of issues, including trade, energy, transportation, regional security, and counterterrorism. Erdogan said terrorism had exacted a heavy price on the region, adding that Iraq and Turkey would continue working together to address common security threats. Energy was also a key focus, with the Turkish president saying Ankara hoped to sign a fresh energy framework deal with Iraq following the expiry earlier this week of a previous framework agreement. He also said al-Zaidi had offered to supply Turkey with 1 million barrels of oil per day, adding that this would be more than enough to meet all of Turkey's energy needs. The two leaders also hailed the emerging Development Road project, a planned rail and road corridor that would link Iraq's Grand Fa port on the Persian Gulf to Turkey before continuing onward into Europe. The project aims to reduce transit times, diversify regional trade routes, and enhance Iraq's role as a key logistics hub, while also deepening economic integration with Turkey. Erdogan noted that bilateral trade had reached $7 billion in 2025, going on to voice confidence that Turkey-Iraq economic ties would continue to grow in the years ahead. The meeting ended before regional tensions escalated again overnight, with the United States and Saudi Arabia launching multiple strikes against targets in Iraq. al-Zaidi, for his part, has yet to issue a statement on the joint U.S.-Saudi operation. But speaking in Ankara, both leaders had stressed the importance of preserving peace in the region. This is Adam Morrow for A News in Istanbul, Turkey.
Keiko Fujimori was sworn in as Peru's president on Tuesday, becoming the country's first elected female head of state. In her inaugural address, Fujimori pledged to restore stability, improve security, strengthen the economy, and rebuild public trust, while calling for national reconciliation after a closely contested election. Fujimori also swore in her cabinet members, emphasizing ministers that would help bolster the economy in energy and mining markets. Japan is turning to an unusual solution as extreme summer heat raises concern over heat stroke. A single-person cooling booth installed at Maebashi City Hall is offering residents a brief escape from soaring temperatures.
The Dohyemon box looks like a vending machine, but inside it offers temporary relief from temperatures approaching 40 degrees Celsius. Installed in the lobby of Maebashi City Hall, the single-person cooling booth is available to anyone seeking a break from the summer heat.
The Dohyemon box was installed on May 25th. It was placed there as a result of a comprehensive partnership agreement between Maebashi City and a company called SDRS Inc., and it is scheduled to remain in place until the end of September. While the number of users was low initially, usage has risen to over 30 people per day recently as the weather has warmed up.
Users sit on a built-in bench as vents direct air cooled to around 5 degrees Celsius towards the head, neck, and shoulders. The booth maintains an internal temperature of about 15 degrees and automatically switches off after 20 minutes to prevent overcooling.
The air blows from around the neck area and the breeze isn't uncomfortably cold. Since cooling the neck and limbs is said to lower body temperature, it felt incredibly cool and refreshing.
The heat is really getting intense now, isn't it? It's not just the humidity. There are days when the temperature climbs close to 40 degrees. Dealing with that kind of heat is a real struggle every year.
Japan regularly records summer temperatures above 35 degrees, with some areas reaching 40. The booth will remain at the City Hall until the end of September as officials assess its use during the hottest months.
Over to the US and Canada now. The Gordie Howe International Bridge has opened to traffic linking Windsor and Ontario with Detroit in Michigan. The construction is expected to reduce traffic and make it easier for people and goods to travel between the two countries. Its opening comes amid trade and tariff tensions. Canadian officials held a low-key opening ceremony without their US counterparts after disagreements over toll sharing and fresh tariff threats from President Donald Trump. That's the news for this hour. Stay tuned to A News. That's all for the latest updates.